Longlegs is a 2024 American horror thriller film written and directed by Osgood Perkins, starring Maika Monroe, Blair Underwood, Alicia Witt, and Nicolas Cage. Set in the 1990s, it tells the story of an FBI agent assigned to track down an occult-driven serial killer who has murdered several families across Oregon. Cage also produced the film through his company, Saturn Films. The film was released in the United States by Neon on July 12, 2024. Made on a budget of under $10 million, it went on to gross $128 million worldwide. It became Neon's highest-grossing domestic release, the most successful independent film of the year, and the biggest box office success of Perkins's career. In 1974 Oregon, a young girl carrying a Polaroid camera hears a mysterious voice and encounters a disturbing man wearing pale makeup. 2 decades later, FBI agent Lee Harker is assigned by her supervisor, William Carter, to investigate a string of murder-suicides in Oregon. In each case, the father kills his family before taking his own life, leaving behind a letter filled with satanic codes signed Longlegs. None of the handwriting matches any of the family members. Lee, who shows signs of clairvoyance, manages to decode the cryptic letters. Her investigation reveals a disturbing pattern. Each family had a 9-year-old daughter born on the 14th of the month, and the murders took place within 6 days before or after the girl's birthday. When charted on a calendar, the dates form an occult triangle, with one final date missing. During a phone call with her mother, Ruth, Lee receives a coded birthday card from Longlegs, warning her that if she reveals its source, Ruth will be killed. Lee takes Lee and William to a doll containing a strange metal orb inside its head. They later question Carrie Ann Camera, the only survivor of Longlegs' killings, who claims she was visited by someone posing as Lee. William begins to suspect Lee may have a hidden link to the killer. Digging into Lee's past, he discovers Ruth once reported an intruder approaching Lee the day before her 9th birthday. Returning home, Lee uncovers childhood belongings, including a Polaroid photograph revealing that Longlegs was the same man she encountered on her birthday years earlier. The photograph leads to Longlegs' arrest. However, Lee realizes the missing date on the occult calendar is the current day, meaning another murder is imminent. In interrogation, Longlegs claims to serve the man downstairs and hints that Ruth has been involved in his crimes. He then violently kills himself by smashing his head against the table. Soon after, Lee learns that Carrie Ann has died by suicide. Agent Browning escorts Lee to her mother's home. While Lee searches inside, Ruth approaches the car outside and fatally shoots Browning. She then destroys a doll resembling a young Lee, causing Lee to collapse. In a vision, Lee learns the truth. When she was a child, Longlegs threatened to kill her unless Ruth complied with his demands. To protect her daughter, Ruth allowed him to live in their basement, where he created satanic dolls. Ruth, disguised as a nun, delivered the dolls to families, triggering fathers to murder their loved ones. Lee's own doll suppressed her memories of Longlegs while subtly influencing her through his magic. Lee awakens in the basement to a phone call from a demonic voice, warning that William Carter's daughter Ruby is about to turn 9. Rushing to the Carter home, Lee finds the family already under the doll's influence. William murders his wife, Anna, before Lee is forced to fatally shoot him to protect Ruby. Ruth attacks Ruby with a dagger, forcing Lee to kill her own mother. As she attempts to destroy the doll, her gun jams. Desperate, she urges Ruby to escape while she confronts the lingering evil. Longlegs stands as a remarkable achievement in contemporary horror cinema, representing a convergence of artistic vision, commercial success, and cultural impact that has redefined what independent horror can accomplish in the modern entertainment landscape. This 2024 American thriller horror film, written and directed by Osgood Perkins, has emerged not merely as another entry in the horror genre but as a cultural phenomenon that has challenged audiences, critics, and industry professionals alike to reconsider the boundaries of psychological terror and supernatural dread. The film's journey from conception to cultural impact reveals a complex tapestry of influences, creative decisions, and marketing innovations that collectively transformed what could have been a modest independent horror film into a groundbreaking cinematic experience. At its core, Longlegs tells the story of FBI agent Lee Harker, portrayed with remarkable intensity by Maika Monroe, who finds herself drawn into an investigation that will ultimately unravel the fabric of her own reality. Set against the backdrop of 1990s Oregon, the film follows Harker as she attempts to track down an occultist serial killer known only as Longlegs, whose true identity is Dale Cobble, brought to life through Nicolas Cage's transformative and deeply unsettling performance. The film's narrative structure operates on multiple levels, functioning simultaneously as a procedural thriller, a supranational horror story, and a deeply personal psychological journey. This multi-layered approach reflects director Osgood Perkins's sophisticated understanding of horror as a genre capable of addressing complex themes of family trauma, hidden truths, and the corrosive effects of secrets maintained across generations. The story begins with a haunting prologue set in 1974 Oregon, where a young girl with a Polaroid camera follows a mysterious voice and encounters an erratic man in pale makeup. This opening sequence establishes the film's commitment to atmospheric dread and its willingness to blur the lines between the supernatural and the psychological. The core mystery revolves around a series of seemingly inexplicable murder-suicides that have plagued Oregon families over the years. Each case follows a disturbing pattern. A father kills his family and himself, leaving behind a letter with satanic coding signed Longlegs, whose handwriting belongs to none of the family members involved. This central puzzle drives the narrative forward while serving as a vehicle for exploring themes of possession, manipulation, and the hidden forces that can corrupt seemingly normal family units. Agent Lee Harker's assignment to this case is far from coincidental, as the film gradually reveals through a series of carefully orchestrated revelations. Harker possesses what the film describes as possible clairvoyance, a supernatural sensitivity that makes her uniquely qualified to investigate these occult-related crimes. This psychic ability serves not only as a plot device but also as a metaphor for the ways in which trauma and hidden knowledge can manifest in unexpected ways throughout our lives. The investigation takes on new urgency when Harker discovers a pattern in the murders that suggests a deeper, more systematic approach to the killings. Each family had a 9-year-old daughter born on the 14th of the month, and the murders all occurred within 6 days before or after the child's birthday. When these dates are plotted on a calendar, they form an occult triangle symbol, with one crucial date missing. This geometric pattern transforms what initially appeared to be random acts of violence into elements of a larger, more sinister design. The film's exploration of family dynamics becomes particularly complex through the character of Ruth Harker, Lee's religious mother, portrayed by Alicia Witt in a performance that balances maternal care with dark secrets. Ruth's relationship with her daughter serves as the emotional core of the film, while simultaneously functioning as the key to understanding the true scope of Longlegs' influence. The revelation that Ruth has been serving as Longlegs' accomplice for decades, operating under duress to protect her daughter, transforms the narrative from a straightforward investigation into a deeply personal family tragedy. This maternal protection, twisted into collaboration with evil, reflects one of Perkins's central themes, the ways in which love and fear can become indistinguishable, leading to choices that ultimately harm those we seek to protect. Ruth's position as both victim and perpetrator complicates easy moral judgments and forces audiences to confront the difficult reality that good intentions can lead to horrific consequences when filtered through fear and desperation. The character of Longlegs himself, as portrayed by Nicolas Cage, represents one of the most distinctive and memorable horror villains in recent cinema. Cage's physical transformation for the role is remarkable, involving extensive makeup and prosthetics that render him nearly unrecognizable. The character's pale, androgynous appearance, coupled with Cage's uniquely unsettling vocal delivery, creates a figure that exists at the intersection of the supernatural and the psychologically disturbed. Longlegs operates not through direct violence but through a form of occult influence that manifests through the creation of satanic dolls. These dolls, containing high-energy metal orbs, serve as vessels for his malevolent influence, allowing him to corrupt families from a distance. This method of killing reflects the film's sophisticated approach to horror, eschewing simple gore and violence in favor of a more insidious form of terror that operates through psychological and supernatural manipulation. The dolls themselves function as powerful symbols within the film's mythology, representing the ways in which evil can infiltrate the most innocent aspects of family life. Children's toys, traditionally symbols of joy and imagination, become instruments of corruption and destruction. This inversion of familiar childhood imagery creates a particularly disturbing effect, as audiences are forced to reconsider objects and experiences typically associated with safety and comfort. The film's visual approach reflects Perkins's commitment to creating an atmosphere of sustained dread rather than relying on conventional horror techniques. The cinematography emphasizes shadows, negative space, and carefully composed frames that create a sense of unease even in seemingly mundane moments. This visual strategy extends to the film's production design, which creates a version of 1990s Oregon that feels both historically accurate and subtly otherworldly. The period setting serves multiple functions within the narrative structure. Set in the pre-digital era, the film creates a world where information travels slowly and communication relies on physical documents, phone calls, and face-to-face encounters. This temporal setting enhances the film's atmosphere of isolation and adds authenticity to the investigative procedures depicted throughout the story. Additionally, the 1990s setting allows the film to explore themes of hidden knowledge and concealed truths without the complications that modern technology and social media might introduce. The investigative elements of the film draw clear inspiration from classic serial killer narratives while introducing supernatural elements that distinguish Longlegs from more conventional procedural thrillers. Agent William Carter, portrayed by Blair Underwood, serves as Lee's supervisor and represents the rational, methodical approach to criminal investigation. His character provides a grounding influence that contrasts with Lee's more intuitive, psychically informed methodology. The dynamic between Carter and Harker reflects broader themes within the film about different ways of knowing and understanding reality. Where Carter relies on evidence, analysis, and logical deduction, Harker operates through intuition, supernatural sensitivity, and psychological insight. This contrast becomes particularly significant as the investigation progresses and conventional law enforcement methods prove inadequate to address the supernatural elements of the case. The film's approach to supernatural horror demonstrates Perkins's sophisticated understanding of the genre's potential for psychological complexity. Rather than presenting the occult elements as external threats that can be defeated through conventional means, Longlegs integrates supernatural and psychological horror in ways that make them inseparable. The influence of the demonic dolls operates through the family dynamics they corrupt, making it impossible to address the supernatural threat without also confronting the psychological and emotional damage it has caused. This integration of supernatural and psychological elements reflects broader trends in contemporary horror cinema, where audiences have become increasingly sophisticated in their expectations for genre films. Modern horror audiences are less interested in simple scares and more drawn to films that use horror elements to explore complex themes about family, trauma, identity, and social structures. Longlegs succeeds in meeting these expectations while also delivering the visceral thrills that horror audiences seek. The film's exploration of religious themes adds another layer of complexity to its thematic structure. The presence of satanic imagery and occult practices creates obvious religious dimensions, but the film's treatment of faith is more nuanced than simple good versus evil narratives might suggest. Ruth's religious background and her disguise as a nun when delivering the cursed dolls create a complex relationship between faith and corruption that resists easy interpretation. This religious complexity extends to the film's treatment of evil itself. Rather than presenting evil as an external force that invades otherwise pure environments, Longlegs suggests that evil operates through existing human weaknesses and fears. The supernatural elements amplify and direct human tendencies toward violence and destruction rather than creating them from nothing. This approach makes the film's horror more psychologically resonant because it suggests that the capacity for corruption exists within ordinary family structures and relationships. The film's treatment of childhood trauma and recovered memories adds psychological depth to its supernatural narrative. Lee's gradual recovery of suppressed memories about her childhood encounter with Longlegs creates a framework for exploring how trauma can be both protective and destructive. The magical doll that blocked Lee's memories also influenced her development, suggesting that protection from traumatic knowledge comes with its own costs. This exploration of memory and trauma reflects contemporary understanding of psychological healing and resilience. The film suggests that complete protection from disturbing truths may not be possible or even desirable, as such protection can prevent the development of genuine agency and self-understanding. Lee's journey toward recovering her memories, while painful, ultimately enables her to confront and potentially overcome the forces that have shaped her life. The film's climactic sequences bring together all of these thematic elements in a series of revelations and confrontations that test both Lee's psychological resilience and her supernatural abilities. The discovery that the final murder in Longlegs' pattern involves Carter's own family creates personal stakes that transcend the professional investigation. Lee must trace to prevent the completion of Longlegs' occult triangle while also confronting the truth about her mother's role in the murders. The final confrontation at the Carter family home demonstrates the film's commitment to psychological complexity over simple resolution. Lee arrives to find the family already under the influence of the demonic doll, forcing her to make impossible choices about whom to save and how to prevent further tragedy. Her decision to kill Carter to protect his daughter Ruby represents a moment of moral ambiguity that complicates traditional heroic narratives. The film's ending, with Lee staring at the doll and telling Ruby they need to leave, suggests that the cycle of supernatural influence may not be easily broken. This ambiguous conclusion reflects the film's broader themes about the persistence of trauma and the difficulty of escaping patterns of violence and corruption that span generations. Rather than providing a clean resolution, the ending suggests that confronting evil is an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance and difficult choices. The production history of Longlegs reveals the careful planning and creative vision that made its success possible. Director Osgood Perkins's previous work in horror cinema provided him with the experience and credibility necessary to attract high-profile talent like Nicolas Cage while maintaining creative control over the project's artistic vision. The film's relatively modest budget of under $10 million required efficient production methods that maximized creative impact while minimizing financial risk. The casting of Maika Monroe as Lee Harker proved particularly significant to the film's success. Monroe's previous work in horror films like It Follows established her as a compelling screen presence capable of conveying both vulnerability and determination. Her performance in Longlegs builds on this foundation while exploring new dimensions of psychological complexity and supernatural sensitivity. Nicolas Cage's involvement in the project, both as star and producer through his Saturn Films company, brought significant industry credibility and marketing potential to the production. Cage's willingness to undergo extensive physical transformation for the role of Longlegs demonstrated his commitment to the project's artistic vision while also generating significant media attention and audience curiosity. The film's production in Vancouver provided both economic advantages and creative opportunities. The city's experienced film production infrastructure enabled efficient shooting while its distinctive architectural and natural environments contributed to the film's atmospheric visual design. The choice to film in Vancouver rather than Oregon, where the story is set, required careful attention to location scouting and production design to maintain authenticity while accommodating budget constraints. The soundtrack and musical score, composed by Zilgi, a pseudonym for Elvis Perkins, the director's brother, represents another crucial element in the film's creative success. The music balances atmospheric dread with moments of intense psychological tension, supporting the narrative's emotional journey while enhancing its supernatural elements. The decision to have the director's brother compose the score reflects the film's collaborative, family-oriented approach to creative production. The marketing campaign for Longlegs has been widely recognized as one of the most innovative and effective horror film marketing efforts in recent years. Neon's guerrilla marketing approach drew inspiration from successful campaigns like the Blair Witch Project, building audience anticipation through mystery and speculation rather than conventional advertising methods. The campaign's 11 promotional videos, released over several months leading up to the film's premiere, gradually revealed information about the project while maintaining an air of mystery about key plot elements and character details. This approach generated significant online discussion and speculation, creating a sense of community among horror fans who collaborated to decode hidden messages and interpret cryptic imagery. The inclusion of interactive elements like phone numbers that played recorded messages from the film's antagonist and cipher puzzles published in newspapers demonstrated the campaign's commitment to immersive storytelling. These elements extended the film's narrative world beyond the theater, allowing audiences to engage with the story in multiple formats and contexts. The campaign's decision to conceal Nicolas Cage's appearance as Longlegs until very late in the promotional cycle created significant audience curiosity and media coverage. When images of Cage's transformation were finally revealed, they generated widespread discussion and analysis, contributing to the film's cultural impact even before its theatrical release. The total marketing budget of under $10 million, focused primarily on digital content rather than traditional television advertising, demonstrated the effectiveness of targeted, innovative marketing approaches for independent films. This strategy proved particularly successful in reaching horror film enthusiasts who actively seek out new content through online communities and social media platforms. The film's release strategy combined traditional theatrical distribution with carefully planned special events and screenings that enhanced its cultural impact. The premiere at the Egyptian Theatre Hollywood and subsequent screenings at film festivals and special venues created a sense of exclusivity and cultural significance that distinguished Longlegs from typical commercial horror releases. The decision to include parent-free screenings acknowledged the film's mature themes and intense content while also creating marketing opportunities that emphasize the film's transgressive, adult-oriented approach to horror. These specialized screenings generated additional media coverage and reinforced the film's reputation as a serious, artistic contribution to the horror genre. The film's box office performance exceeded industry expectations and established new benchmarks for independent horror film success. Opening with $22.4 million in its first weekend, Longlegs achieved the best opening weekend in Neon's history and became the highest-grossing independent film of 2024. These commercial achievements validated the effectiveness of the film's creative and marketing strategies while demonstrating the continued viability of original horror content in an entertainment market increasingly dominated by franchises and sequels. The film's international performance, grossing $52.6 million outside North America for a worldwide total of $126.9 million, demonstrated its appeal to global audiences and confirmed horror's continued strength as an international entertainment genre. This global success has significant implications for future independent horror productions, suggesting that innovative, artistically ambitious projects can achieve both critical acclaim and commercial viability in the current market. Critical reception of Longlegs has been overwhelmingly positive, with many reviewers praising its atmospheric approach to horror, strong performances, and sophisticated treatment of complex themes. The film's 86% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, based on over 300 reviews, reflects broad critical consensus about its artistic merits and effectiveness as entertainment. Critics have particularly praised Osgood Perkins's direction, noting his ability to balance multiple horror subgenres while maintaining narrative coherence and thematic focus. Reviews frequently mention the film's saturated mood and disquieting atmosphere, terms that capture its commitment to sustain psychological tension over momentary scares. Nicolas Cage's performance as Longlegs has received widespread critical acclaim, with many reviewers describing it as one of his most effective and unsettling roles. Critics have noted the physical transformation required for the role while also praising Cage's vocal work and his ability to create a character that is simultaneously ridiculous and genuinely terrifying. Maika Monroe's performance as Lee Harker has been praised for its subtlety and psychological complexity. Critics have noted her ability to convey both professional competence and personal vulnerability, creating a character who functions effectively within the film's procedural elements while also serving as an emotional anchor for its more supernatural and psychological components. The film's technical elements, including cinematography, production design, and sound design, have received consistent critical praise. Reviewers have noted the film's careful attention to period detail and its effective use of visual composition to create atmosphere and support thematic development. Some critics have expressed reservations about the film's complex plotting and multiple thematic layers, suggesting that the combination of procedural, supernatural, and psychological elements occasionally creates narrative confusion. However, most reviews frame these concerns as minor issues within an otherwise successful and ambitious project. The film's treatment of religious and occult themes has generated significant critical discussion, with reviewers praising its nuanced approach to questions of faith, evil, and supernatural influence. Critics have noted the film's avoidance of simple good versus evil narratives in favor of more complex explorations of how supernatural forces interact with existing human relationships and social structures. Audience response to Longlegs has been generally positive, though somewhat more divided than critical reception. The film's cinema score of C+ suggests that some audiences found the experience less satisfying than critics, possibly reflecting differences in expectations between general moviegoers and horror film enthusiasts. The film has generated significant online discussion and analysis, with horror fans creating detailed examinations of its symbolism, hidden imagery, and thematic content. Director Osgood Perkins's revelation that the film contains 15 appearances of the devil hidden throughout various scenes has inspired extensive frame-by-frame analysis and community engagement. Some audience members and critics have raised concerns about the film's portrayal of its antagonist, suggesting that the character's androgynous characteristics might perpetuate harmful stereotypes about LGBTQ+ individuals. These concerns have generated thoughtful discussion within horror fan communities about representation, stereotyping, and the genre's historical treatment of gender and sexuality themes. Director Osgood Perkins has responded to these concerns by explicitly denouncing anti-transgender sentiment while also explaining the creative decisions behind the character's presentation. This response has been generally well received within the horror community and demonstrates the film's creators' willingness to engage with complex cultural and social issues raised by their work. The film's cultural impact extends beyond its immediate commercial and critical success to influence broader discussions about the horror genre's artistic potential and cultural relevance. Longlegs has been praised by established filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and Paul Schrader, whose endorsements have helped establish the film's credibility within serious film culture. The success of Longlegs has implications for independent horror film production and distribution, demonstrating that original, artistically ambitious projects can compete effectively with franchise-based entertainment. The film's innovative marketing campaign has become a case study in effective independent film promotion, influencing marketing strategies for other horror and independent film releases. The film's exploration of family trauma, hidden secrets, and generational patterns of violence reflects broader cultural conversations about mental health, family dynamics, and the long-term effects of childhood experiences. These themes resonate with contemporary audiences who are increasingly sophisticated in their understanding of psychological complexity and trauma recovery. Longlegs has also contributed to ongoing discussions about the horror genre's potential for addressing serious social and psychological themes while still providing effective entertainment. The film's success suggests that audiences are receptive to horror films that challenge conventional genre boundaries and expectations. The film's treatment of supernatural elements within a realistic contemporary setting reflects broader trends in horror cinema toward psychological complexity and thematic sophistication, rather than relying on simple supernatural explanations. Longlegs integrates its occult elements with realistic portrayals of law enforcement procedures, family relationships, and psychological development. This approach has influenced other horror filmmakers and producers, contributing to a broader shift toward more psychologically complex and thematically ambitious horror productions. The film's success has helped establish market demand for horror films that combine genre thrills with serious artistic and thematic content. The film's depiction of law enforcement procedures and FBI investigation methods has been praised for its attention to detail and realistic portrayal of criminal investigation processes. This commitment to procedural accuracy enhances the film's credibility while also creating effective contrast with its supernatural elements. The integration of procedural and supernatural elements reflects the film's sophisticated approach to genre conventions, demonstrating how traditional horror themes can be enhanced through combination with other narrative forms. This hybridization has become increasingly common in contemporary horror cinema, as filmmakers seek to create more complex and engaging experiences for sophisticated audiences. The film's period setting in the 1990s serves multiple narrative and thematic functions while also appealing to audiences' nostalgia for pre-digital communication and investigation methods. This temporal distance creates both familiarity and strangeness, enabling audiences to engage with the story while also maintaining the psychological distance necessary for effective horror. The choice to set the film in Oregon reflects careful consideration of geographic and cultural factors that support the story's themes. Oregon's reputation for progressive politics and alternative lifestyles creates an interesting contrast with the film's conservative religious themes. While the state's natural environment provides atmospheric support for the story's supernatural elements, the film's attention to regional detail and local culture demonstrates the importance of specific geographic settings in creating effective horror narratives. Rather than using generic locations, Longlegs benefits from its specific Pacific Northwest setting, which contributes to both its atmospheric effectiveness and its thematic coherence. Looking toward the future, Longlegs represents a significant achievement in independent horror cinema that will likely influence genre filmmaking for years to come. Its successful combination of artistic ambition, commercial viability, and cultural relevance provides a model for other filmmakers seeking to create original horror content that transcends simple genre entertainment. The film's innovative marketing campaign has established new standards for independent film promotion, demonstrating the effectiveness of community building and mystery-based approaches over traditional advertising methods. Future horror films will likely incorporate similar strategies, though the specific techniques that made Longlegs successful will need to be adapted to different projects and contexts. The critical and commercial success of Longlegs has enhanced the reputation of director Osgood Perkins and established him as a significant voice in contemporary horror cinema. His ability to balance supernatural terror with psychological complexity while maintaining commercial appeal positions him as an important figure in the genre's continued evolution. Nicolas Cage's performance in Longlegs has renewed appreciation for his range as an actor and his willingness to take creative risks in service of artistic vision. The role demonstrates Cage's continued relevance in contemporary cinema while also showcasing his ability to collaborate effectively with innovative directors on challenging projects. Maika Monroe's work in the film has further established her as one of the most compelling actors working in horror cinema today. Her ability to convey both professional competence and personal vulnerability makes her particularly effective in horror roles that require psychological complexity and emotional authenticity. The film's success has positive implications for independent film financing and distribution, demonstrating that original horror content can generate significant returns on modest investments when supported by effective marketing and strong creative vision. This success will likely encourage further investment in independent horror productions. The influence of Longlegs on horror cinema extends beyond its immediate commercial and critical impact to include its contribution to ongoing conversations about the genre's artistic potential and cultural significance. The film demonstrates that horror can address serious themes and complex characters while still providing the visceral thrills that genre audiences expect. The film's treatment of family relationships, particularly the complex dynamic between Lee and Ruth Harker, provides a model for how horror films can explore intimate human relationships within supernatural and threatening contexts. This approach has influenced other filmmakers to consider how personal relationships can be enhanced and complicated by genre elements. The supernatural elements in Longlegs, particularly the concept of demonic influence operating through cursed objects, reflect traditional horror themes while updating them for contemporary audiences. This balance between classical horror concepts and modern sensibilities demonstrates effective approaches to genre innovation. The film's visual style, characterized by careful composition, atmospheric lighting, and subtle special effects, has influenced other horror productions to prioritize mood and atmosphere over spectacular visual displays. This approach reflects growing sophistication among horror audiences who appreciate subtlety and suggestion over explicit imagery. The sound design and musical score in Longlegs have been praised for their contribution to the film's atmospheric effectiveness. The careful integration of ambient sound, musical themes, and silence creates an audio landscape that supports and enhances the visual storytelling while contributing to the film's overall sense of dread and unease. The film's editing and pacing demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how to build and maintain tension over the course of a feature-length narrative. Rather than relying on frequent shock moments, Longlegs creates sustained unease that builds gradually toward moments of intense psychological and supernatural revelation. These technical achievements have educational value for film students and emerging filmmakers, providing examples of how careful attention to craft elements can enhance storytelling effectiveness. The film's success demonstrates that technical excellence remains crucial to effective filmmaking, even in an era of rapidly changing technology and production methods. The cultural conversations generated by Longlegs, including discussions about representation, stereotype, and the horror genre's relationship to social issues, reflect the film's engagement with contemporary cultural concerns. This engagement demonstrates horror cinema's continued relevance as a medium for exploring complex social and psychological themes. The film's international success suggests that its themes and approach resonate across cultural boundaries, reflecting universal concerns about family relationships, hidden truths, and the persistence of trauma across generations. This global appeal indicates horror's continued effectiveness as a universal entertainment form. The awards recognition that Longlegs has received, including nominations from various film critics organizations and genre-specific awards, confirms its artistic merits while also enhancing its cultural prestige. These accolades help establish the film's lasting significance within horror cinema history. In conclusion, Longlegs represents a remarkable achievement in contemporary horror cinema that successfully combines artistic ambition with commercial viability while addressing complex themes about family, trauma, and supernatural influence. The film's success reflects the continued vitality of the horror genre and its capacity to evolve and adapt to changing audience expectations and cultural contexts. The collaborative effort that created Longlegs, involving director Osgood Perkins, stars Maika Monroe and Nicolas Cage, and the entire production team, demonstrates the importance of shared creative vision and artistic commitment in producing effective independent cinema. The film's success validates the artistic choices made throughout its development and production. The innovative marketing campaign that supported Longlegs has established new standards for independent film promotion while demonstrating the effectiveness of community building and audience engagement strategies. These marketing innovations will likely influence future film releases across multiple genres and budget levels. The critical acclaim and commercial success achieved by Longlegs confirm the continued audience appetite for original, artistically ambitious horror content. The film's performance suggests that audiences are increasingly sophisticated in their genre expectations and responsive to films that challenge conventional boundaries and formulas. The cultural impact of Longlegs extends beyond its immediate entertainment value to include its contribution to ongoing conversations about representation, artistic freedom, and the social responsibilities of filmmakers. These discussions reflect the film's engagement with contemporary cultural concerns while also demonstrating horror cinema's continued relevance as a medium for social commentary. The technical achievements displayed in Longlegs, from cinematography and production design to sound design and visual effects, provide valuable examples for film students and emerging filmmakers. The film demonstrates that technical excellence remains crucial to effective storytelling, regardless of budget constraints or production limitations. The performances delivered by the cast of Longlegs, particularly Maika Monroe's nuanced portrayal of Lee Harker and Nicolas Cage's transformative work as the title character, establish new standards for horror film acting while demonstrating the genre's capacity for supporting complex character development and psychological exploration. The thematic complexity of Longlegs, encompassing family relationships, supernatural horror, criminal investigation, and psychological trauma, demonstrates the potential for horror films to address multiple layers of meaning while still providing effective entertainment. This multi-layered approach reflects the increasing sophistication of both filmmakers and audiences within the genre. The success of Longlegs has implications for the future of independent horror cinema, suggesting that original, artistically ambitious projects can compete effectively with franchise-based entertainment when supported by strong creative vision and innovative marketing strategies. This success will likely encourage further investment in independent horror productions. The lasting impact of Longlegs on horror cinema will likely be measured not only in its immediate commercial and critical success but also in its influence on future filmmakers and productions. The film's innovative approaches to storytelling, character development, marketing, and thematic exploration provide valuable models for future horror film creation. As horror cinema continues to evolve in response to changing audience expectations and cultural contexts, Longlegs stands as an important example of how the genre can maintain its essential thrills while also engaging with complex themes and sophisticated storytelling techniques. The film's success suggests that the future of horror cinema lies not in abandoning the genre's traditional elements but in finding innovative ways to combine them with contemporary concerns and artistic ambitions. The achievement represented by Longlegs reflects the collaborative efforts of all involved in its creation, from the initial creative vision through production, marketing, and distribution. The film's success validates the artistic and commercial strategies employed while also demonstrating the continued viability of independent film production in an increasingly complex entertainment landscape. Ultimately, Longlegs succeeds as both entertainment and art, providing audiences with effective scares and psychological thrills while also offering complex themes and sophisticated character development. This combination of accessibility and depth reflects the best traditions of horror cinema while also pointing toward the genre's continued evolution and artistic potential. The film's exploration of family dynamics, supernatural influence, and psychological trauma resonates with contemporary audiences while also drawing on classical horror traditions. This balance between innovation and tradition demonstrates effective approaches to genre filmmaking that honor established conventions while also pushing boundaries and exploring new possibilities. In the context of contemporary cinema, Longlegs represents a successful example of how independent films can achieve both critical acclaim and commercial success through careful attention to craft, innovative marketing, and commitment to artistic vision. The film's achievement provides encouragement for other independent filmmakers while also demonstrating the continued audience appetite for original, thoughtfully crafted horror content. The legacy of Longlegs will likely be measured not only in its immediate impact but also in its influence on future horror films and filmmakers. As the genre continues to evolve, the innovations and achievements represented by this film will continue to inform and inspire new approaches to horror storytelling, character development, and audience engagement. Through its combination of supernatural terror, psychological complexity, and family drama, Longlegs has established itself as a significant contribution to contemporary horror cinema that will likely be studied and appreciated for years to come. The film's success demonstrates the continued vitality and relevance of horror as both entertainment and art, confirming the genre's capacity to evolve while maintaining its essential power to disturb, challenge, and engage audiences in profound and lasting ways. The film Longlegs emerged as one of the most anticipated horror projects of the modern era, largely due to the enigmatic marketing campaign that surrounded its announcement and the intense aura of secrecy around its development. What began as whispers of a collaboration between up-and-coming horror author Osgood Perkins and one of the most celebrated actors of his generation gradually transformed into one of the most compelling stories in contemporary genre cinema. The casting process itself played a crucial role in elevating expectations. Nicolas Cage, an actor with a career that has spanned decades of eccentric, daring, and unpredictable roles, was confirmed to be portraying the titular figure known only as Longlegs. His involvement alone injected the project with a sense of danger and gravitas, promising a horror film that would not merely rely on conventional scares but one that would delve into unsettling psychological and atmospheric realms. Alongside Cage, the casting of Maika Monroe provided a sharp counterbalance. Monroe had already carved out a reputation as a modern-day scream queen through performances in films like It Follows and The Guest. Her ability to combine vulnerability with an underlying strength made her a natural choice for a narrative that would pit innocence and determination against overwhelming darkness. The synergy between Cage's chaotic energy and Monroe's grounded intensity became one of the most talked about elements of the project even before filming began. The development of Longlegs took place at a time when horror was experiencing a major cultural and critical resurgence. A wave of filmmakers were reinventing the genre, pushing beyond cliché-copyright into new thematic and stylistic territory. Perkins had already begun establishing his own distinct voice with earlier films such as The Blackcoat's Daughter and I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, both of which leaned into psychological unease, ambiguous storytelling, and an emphasis on mood over spectacle. With Longlegs, Perkins envisioned something even more ambitious, a story that would blend occult horror with procedural elements, creating a fusion of serial killer investigation and supernatural dread. The project attracted producers who recognized that Perkins' talent, paired with the right cast, could create something enduring. During pre-production, significant emphasis was placed on maintaining secrecy. The filmmakers were careful not to reveal too much about the plot, with marketing materials offering cryptic imagery and fragmented clues rather than straightforward explanations. This approach not only heightened curiosity but also aligned perfectly with the film's themes of mystery and hidden malevolence. Test footage, early stills, and promotional snippets teased Cage in grotesque makeup, Monroe in tense environments, and strange occult imagery that hinted at a narrative where human evil and supernatural forces intertwined. Fans began speculating wildly about the nature of Cage's character, debating whether Longlegs was a literal supernatural being or a deeply disturbed man whose actions evoked mythological terror. Filming began under an atmosphere of deliberate restraint. Perkins and his crew chose to focus on creating an intimate but suffocating environment, avoiding the trappings of big-budget horror in favor of a more restrained but intensely crafted atmosphere. Shooting locations were carefully selected to reflect the bleak, desolate tone of the narrative. Much of the production took place in rural and isolated settings, which lent themselves naturally to the film's sense of foreboding. Abandoned houses, dimly lit basements, and wide, empty landscapes were all woven into the visual fabric of the story. The cinematography emphasized shadows, silences, and unsettling stillness, relying less on fast editing and more on long, lingering shots that allowed tension to build until it became unbearable. Nicolas Cage's process in embodying the character of Longlegs became one of the central fascinations of the production. Known for his deeply immersive and often extreme methods, Cage approached the role as both an external performance of horror and an internal exploration of deranged psychology. His makeup and costuming were designed to obscure his natural features, making him appear simultaneously grotesque and uncanny, a figure that could be mistaken for something inhuman even though he was ostensibly just a man. Cage reportedly drew inspiration from a mix of real-life serial killers, occult symbolism, and his own willingness to push his performance beyond traditional boundaries. This created a character that was not merely terrifying in action but deeply disturbing in presence. Cast and crew often spoke about how unsettling it was to be around him on set while in character, as the aura he projected bled into the atmosphere of the filming process itself. Maika Monroe's role demanded a different kind of discipline. As the protagonist caught in the orbit of this horrific figure, her performance relied heavily on subtle reactions, controlled fear, and a gradual transformation from uncertainty to resilience. The interplay between her character and Cage's was constructed less as a straightforward battle of good and evil and more as a psychological chess match. Monroe spent considerable time working with Perkins to calibrate her responses, ensuring that her portrayal remained relatable while also reflecting the trauma and intensity her character endured. The production team also placed heavy emphasis on sound design and music, recognizing that horror thrives not only on visuals but on auditory experience. The score for Longlegs was crafted to be as unsettling as the imagery, using dissonant tones, minimalistic structures, and sudden bursts of sound that pierced through otherwise quiet sequences. Perkins collaborated closely with the composer to ensure that the music never felt like a traditional horror soundtrack but rather like an extension of the film's malevolent atmosphere. Silence was used strategically, allowing long stretches of tension before a carefully placed sound would jolt the audience. This balance between quiet dread and sudden disruption became one of the defining features of the viewing experience. When the time came for marketing and release, the film's promotional campaign leaned into the mystique it had cultivated from the very beginning. Trailers were intentionally cryptic, showing only fragments of narrative but emphasizing disturbing imagery and Cage's haunting presence. Posters used minimalistic designs, often featuring symbols, distorted faces, or eerie shadows rather than straightforward character portraits. This marketing approach created an aura of curiosity, leaving audiences uncertain about what the film would actually deliver but intrigued enough to want to find out. The promotional team leveraged viral campaigns, cryptic online puzzles, and hidden clues embedded in marketing material, inviting fans to piece together their own theories about the story. Upon release, Longlegs generated strong reactions, both from critics and general audiences. Many praised the film for its atmosphere, performances, and refusal to compromise in pursuit of commercial accessibility. Cage's performance was hailed as one of his most terrifying in years, cementing his reputation as an actor unafraid to take risks in the horror genre. Monroe was likewise praised for anchoring the film with a human dimension that balanced Cage's overwhelming presence. Perkins' direction was noted for its patience and its ability to maintain tension without resorting to cheap jump scares. Some viewers, however, found the film too slow, too ambiguous, or too opaque in its storytelling. These criticisms, however, often played into the broader conversation about what modern horror should be, whether it should prioritize mood and psychological impact or traditional thrills and shocks. At the box office, the film exceeded initial expectations, particularly given its relatively modest budget. Horror films have long proven to be financially reliable investments, but Longlegs stood out for its ability to attract both mainstream audiences and the art house crowd. Its strong opening weekend was bolstered by positive word of mouth, particularly from horror fans who championed it as one of the most original and disturbing films in recent memory. Its legs at the box office, appropriately enough given its title, proved longer than many anticipated, with sustained interest weeks after release. Over time, the film became not only a commercial success but a cultural phenomenon within the horror community. Memes emerged around Cage's appearance, his unsettling line deliveries, and the eerie symbolism scattered throughout the movie. Clips from the film went viral on social media, often accompanied by humorous or ironic captions that contrasted with the disturbing context of the scenes. The juxtaposition of true terror with online humor allowed Longlegs to transcend its genre, becoming a point of reference even among those who had not seen it. Fan art, cosplay, and online discussions flourished, with audiences dissecting the film's symbolism, debating interpretations of its ending, and speculating about hidden meanings. The critical analysis of Longlegs extended well beyond surface-level reactions. Scholars and critics delved into the film's exploration of evil as both a human and supernatural phenomenon. The character of Longlegs was analyzed not merely as a villain but as an embodiment of amorphous dread, a representation of the ways in which human cruelty can feel inhuman. The blending of procedural elements such as investigation and profiling with occult horror opened up conversations about the intersection between rationality and irrational terror. Perkins' decision to leave many questions unanswered invited endless interpretations, positioning the film within a tradition of horror works that prioritize ambiguity over resolution. As the months passed, Longlegs continued to generate discourse, with some suggesting it marked a new milestone in Nicolas Cage's career, cementing his role as a modern horror icon in addition to his decades-long reputation as one of cinema's most daring performers. For Maika Monroe, the film further established her as one of the defining figures of contemporary horror, solidifying her status as a reliable anchor for atmospheric, thought-provoking genre projects. The mythology surrounding Longlegs only deepened once audiences had the chance to fully absorb the film, and conversations began to focus on the layered storytelling choices that Osgood Perkins made in his construction of the narrative. While at its surface level the movie could be described as a story about a young FBI agent investigating a series of horrific murders linked to an elusive and sinister figure, the undercurrents of the narrative suggested much more. Themes of inherited trauma, the infiltration of evil into ordinary life, and the blurred line between human monstrosity and supernatural malevolence became recurring points of debate. Perkins structured the film in such a way that ambiguity was not a byproduct of incomplete storytelling but an intentional design, forcing the audience to confront their own interpretations of what they had seen. This ambiguity extended especially to Cage's character, who became less of a clearly defined villain and more of an allegorical embodiment of malignant force. Some critics argued that Longlegs represented the inevitability of violence in society, a specter that transcends logic and cannot be contained by law enforcement or reason. Others saw him as a symbolic manifestation of parental or generational corruption, a figure that infected the lives of others not simply through action but by planting seeds of dread that continued to grow in their victims' minds. The fact that Cage performed the role with such unpredictability ensured that every interpretation had grounding in his performance. One moment, he appeared almost absurd, teetering on the edge of caricature, and in the next, he exuded raw terror that made audiences recoil. This oscillation between the ridiculous and the terrifying became one of the most unsettling aspects of his presence, for it destabilized the audience's ability to anticipate or categorize him. The film's production design reinforced these themes. The environments in which Longlegs operated often carried a sense of distortion, with cluttered interiors, strange symbols scrawled on walls, and an uncanny emptiness in otherwise ordinary settings. Perkins collaborated closely with his art department to ensure that the mise-en-scène carried its own language, communicating layers of narrative that were never explicitly spelled out in dialogue. Everyday objects became imbued with ominous undertones, from children's toys left in strange arrangements to doors slightly ajar in ways that implied intrusion. This approach recalled the tradition of slow burn horror where the environment itself becomes complicit in terror, echoing works such as The Shining where architecture and space exert psychological pressure on characters and audiences alike. The cinematography followed a similar philosophy. Rather than relying on rapid cuts and conventional shock tactics, the camera lingered in ways that forced viewers to search for meaning in the frame. Often, the most terrifying moments occurred in the periphery, with something unsettling occupying the background while characters remain unaware. The use of shadows and dim lighting created a world where visibility itself was a fragile thing, making audiences question whether what they were seeing was actually present or a figment of their own paranoia. This was especially true in scenes involving Cage's character, where the camera would deliberately obscure his full presence, showing him only in fragments or partially concealed by darkness. By denying full exposure, the cinematography created a sense of mystery that amplified his menace. One of the more unique aspects of the filmmaking was the way sound design and score were intertwined. The composer worked not to create music in the traditional sense but to evoke a soundscape of unease. Instruments were often manipulated to produce unnatural tones, blending organic sound with mechanical distortion. At times, the music would bleed seamlessly into the sound design, leaving audiences uncertain whether they were hearing part of the score or a diegetic sound within the world of the film. This auditory blurring mirrored the film's thematic focus on ambiguity, reinforcing the idea that the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were never secure. The film's release strategy reflected the careful planning that had characterized its development. A limited rollout in select theaters preceded a wider expansion, allowing word of mouth to build momentum among horror enthusiasts. Early screenings at genre festivals ignited fervent discussion, with reports circulating about walkouts from those who found the film too disturbing as well as standing ovations from others who hailed it as a new classic. This polarity only increased public curiosity, ensuring that when the film reached mainstream distribution, audiences flocked to see what had provoked such extreme reactions. Box office performance reflected the strength of this strategy. While not released with the kind of blockbuster saturation typical of mainstream horror franchises, Longlegs managed to carve out impressive earnings relative to its budget. Its opening weekend surpassed projections, propelled by social media buzz and critical acclaim, and the film demonstrated unusual staying power. Instead of fading quickly, it continued to attract new viewers week after week, sustained by ongoing discussions, theories, and memes that kept it in the cultural spotlight. The film's box office trajectory echoed that of other slow burn horror hits that grew from cult interest to broader recognition, cementing it as both a financial and artistic success. Critical reception ranged from outright adulation to pointed criticism, though even detractors acknowledged the film's ambition. Supporters hailed it as a landmark in contemporary horror, praising Perkins' directorial confidence, Cage's transformative performance, and Monroe's empathetic grounding of the story. For many, the film represented the culmination of a new wave of horror that sought to engage with deeper psychological and societal concerns rather than merely provide momentary thrills. Detractors, however, argued that the pacing was too slow, the narrative too opaque, and the symbolism too indulgent. These criticisms, while valid for some audiences, paradoxically contributed to the film's mystique, as debates over its strengths and weaknesses ensured that it remained part of cultural discourse long after its theatrical run. The online presence of Longlegs took on a life of its own. Memes circulated of Cage's distorted face and uncanny delivery, often repurposed for humorous commentary on everyday life. The stark contrast between the horror context of these images and their comedic online use only heightened their impact, spreading awareness of the film far beyond traditional horror circles. Fans began creating elaborate theories on message boards and social media platforms, dissecting every frame for hidden clues or symbols. This participatory culture mirrored earlier phenomena surrounding cryptic horror films, reinforcing the sense that Longlegs was not simply a film but an experience to be puzzled over and shared collectively. Fan art and cosplay became prominent expressions of this cultural impact. Cage's grotesque makeup and distinctive wardrobe lent themselves naturally to reinterpretation, with fans replicating his look at conventions and on social media. Some even reimagined the character in humorous or surreal contexts, blending horror aesthetics with pop culture references. Monroe's character, though less visually flamboyant, also inspired fan admiration, particularly for her portrayal of resilience in the face of overwhelming dread. Together, these contributions demonstrated how Longlegs managed to extend its influence beyond the screen, embedding itself within the broader fabric of internet and fan culture. Academics and critics began to write extensively on the film, situating it within traditions of both psychological horror and occult narratives. The parallels between Longlegs and earlier works such as Silence of the Lambs were frequently noted, given its focus on an investigator confronting an elusive killer. Yet the addition of occult themes set it apart, aligning it with films like The Exorcist in its exploration of evil that transcends the rational. Perkins' distinctive visual and narrative style, meanwhile, drew comparisons to directors such as David Lynch, whose work similarly blurred the boundaries between dreamlike surrealism and grounded reality. These discussions helped solidify the film's reputation as a serious work of art rather than mere genre entertainment. In retrospect, many began to view Longlegs as a turning point not only for Perkins' career but for horror cinema more broadly. It demonstrated that even in an era dominated by franchise reboots and formulaic scares, there remained space for bold, original visions that challenged audiences to engage on deeper levels. Its success validated the appetite for horror that was both terrifying and thought-provoking, encouraging studios to take chances on similarly ambitious projects. The discussions that followed the release of Longlegs quickly began to reflect the film's multi-layered approach to horror, as audiences and critics alike attempted to decipher the many layers of metaphor and subtext woven into the story. One of the most fascinating aspects of its aftermath was how different groups of viewers brought their own interpretations to the table, depending on their backgrounds, sensibilities, and prior knowledge of the horror canon. To some, the film was a straightforward story of a deranged man steeped in occult practices, whose crimes reached such a level of intensity that they almost took on a supernatural dimension. To others, it was never about the literal actions on screen but about the way trauma and evil manifest within human consciousness, making the narrative more of a psychological exploration than a crime procedural. What made the film stand apart in these debates was Osgood Perkins' refusal to give easy answers. Unlike many horror films that conclude with either the eradication of evil or a clear explanation for its persistence, Longlegs left its central mysteries unresolved. Viewers were left wondering whether Cage's character was truly connected to forces beyond human comprehension or if his ritualistic behaviors were the desperate tremblings of a deeply deranged individual. This intentional withholding of resolution created the kind of narrative tension that lingers long after the credits roll. Perkins himself suggested in interviews that horror becomes most powerful when it denies closure, because it forces the audience to carry the story with them into their own lives, projecting their fears onto the ambiguity left behind. Nicolas Cage's role in this process cannot be overstated. His portrayal of Longlegs was so committed, so unpredictable, that audiences struggled to pin down whether they were watching a human being or something else entirely. His strange cadence, unusual gestures, and ever-shifting facial expressions made his character a living contradiction, at once absurd and utterly horrifying. One moment he might appear pitiful, like a broken man consumed by his obsessions, and the next he could shift into an image of pure malice, commanding the space around him with terrifying authority. The performance became a touchstone in discussions about method acting in horror, with many noting that Cage blurred the lines between performance and possession, creating the impression that he had channeled something far beyond himself. The makeup and costume design enhanced this impression. The production team opted not for over-the-top prosthetics or heavy CGI but for subtle distortions of Cage's natural appearance, slight exaggerations of facial structure, unsettling pale tones, and carefully chosen wardrobe pieces lend him an otherworldly quality without ever tipping into caricature. The result was a figure who could plausibly exist in reality while simultaneously evoking something archetypally monstrous. Costume choices: oversized clothing, incongruous patterns, and archaic accessories were deliberately unsettling, creating the sense that Longlegs existed out of time, neither fully modern nor entirely anchored in the past. By contrast, Maika Monroe's character embodied the grounded, human element of the narrative. Her performance was widely praised for its restraint, as she avoided melodrama in favor of quiet determination and controlled vulnerability. This created a necessary balance in the film, ensuring that the audience had an emotional anchor amid the chaos of Cage's performance and the film's surreal atmosphere. Monroe's journey through the narrative was as much about her inner transformation as it was about the external conflict, portraying the psychological toll of confronting evil in a way that resonated with viewers. Behind the scenes, the production was reported to be both challenging and invigorating. Crew members described the atmosphere on set as intense, particularly when Cage was in character. The sense of unease that his performance created extended even beyond the scenes being filmed, as his commitment to maintaining the aura of his character often blurred the line between performance and presence. Perkins reportedly encouraged this intensity, believing that the disquiet it generated would bleed authentically into the performances of other actors and into the tone of the film itself. Filming in isolated, rural locations only amplified this atmosphere, as cast and crew often found themselves surrounded by eerie silence and desolate landscapes that mirrored the bleakness of the story. The music of Longlegs deserves particular attention as a key component of its success. The score was less about melody and more about texture, creating an auditory environment that was itself unsettling. Strings were bent to unnatural pitches, percussion was sparse and jarring, and electronic distortions created the sense of sound decaying into noise. The composer frequently employed near silence, punctuated by sudden auditory ruptures, to keep audiences perpetually on edge. Many critics noted that the film's sound design was as important as its visuals in generating fear, as the audience never felt entirely safe in the silence nor entirely prepared for the disruptions that followed. This soundscape aligned with Perkins' directorial philosophy that horror lies as much in anticipation and atmosphere as in direct confrontation. The reception of Longlegs demonstrated the film's capacity to resonate across different demographics. Hardcore horror fans appreciated its willingness to embrace ambiguity and psychological depth, recognizing it as part of a lineage of horror films that sought to elevate the genre beyond cheap thrills. General audiences, meanwhile, were captivated by the star power of Nicolas Cage and Maika Monroe, with Cage's involvement in particular serving as a significant draw for viewers who might otherwise have overlooked a smaller horror film. Critical responses were generally positive, with major outlets praising its artistry even while noting that its pacing and opacity might alienate some viewers. This polarization ultimately worked in the film's favor, as controversy fueled discussion and extended its cultural relevance. At the box office, Longlegs' financial performance was notable not only for its profitability but for its longevity. Horror films are often front-loaded, generating strong opening weekends but declining sharply thereafter. Longlegs, however, displayed what analysts described as long legs, sustaining steady attendance over multiple weeks. This endurance was attributed to word of mouth and the cultural phenomenon surrounding the film's memes, theories, and viral online presence. Social media platforms amplified its reach, with clips of Cage's most bizarre moments spreading rapidly, often recontextualized with humorous captions or juxtaposed against unrelated cultural references. This meme culture did not undermine the film's horror but rather expanded its impact, ensuring that it remained visible even to those who had not yet seen it. As months passed, the cultural footprint of Longlegs only deepened. Academic articles and essays began analyzing it in detail, situating it within the evolving landscape of 21st century horror. Many writers explored its connections to earlier works in both cinema and literature, tracing lines to Gothic traditions, occult narratives, and psychological thrillers. Others examined its use of ambiguity as a narrative strategy, arguing that it reflected broader cultural anxieties in a world where certainty and clarity are increasingly elusive. The film became a reference point in discussions of elevated horror, though many rejected this label, noting that Longlegs was as much about raw, visceral fear as it was about intellectual engagement. Fan engagement also continued to thrive, with creative reinterpretations of the film proliferating across the internet. Cosplay of Cage's character became popular at conventions, with fans recreating his unsettling look with painstaking accuracy. Artworks, short films, and even parody videos emerged, demonstrating the ways in which the film's imagery had imprinted itself on collective imagination. Some fans even created elaborate explanations of the film's symbolism, constructing theories that combine references to real-world occult practices, psychology, and cinematic influences. While Perkins rarely confirmed or denied these theories, his openness to interpretation encouraged this participatory culture, making the film a living text that continued to evolve through audience engagement. Within the broader history of Nicolas Cage's career, Longlegs stands as a pivotal entry. Cage had long been known for his willingness to embrace eccentric, often extreme roles, but his portrayal here demonstrated a unique synthesis of his talents. Critics noted that the role allowed him to explore both his penchant for the outrageous and his capacity for deeply unsettling nuance. It became one of those performances frequently cited in discussions of Cage's legacy, alongside works like Mandy and Leaving Las Vegas, cementing his reputation as one of the most fearless actors of his generation. For Maika Monroe, the film reinforced her standing as one of contemporary horror's most reliable stars. Her continued success in the genre reflected not only her talent but her ability to choose projects that resonated with audiences on deeper levels. In Longlegs, she provided the emotional grounding necessary to balance Cage's unhinged performance, proving once again that she could anchor a film that demanded both vulnerability and resilience. The legacy of Longlegs appears secure as one of the defining horror films of its era. Its influence extends not only to audiences but to the industry itself, as studios recognize the viability of supporting original, auteur-driven horror projects. While horror has always thrived in cycles of innovation and repetition, Longlegs represents a moment when originality and artistry coalesced with commercial success, reminding filmmakers and studios alike that audiences are hungry for bold and unsettling visions. As Longlegs continued to circulate in theaters and then moved into its streaming and home release window, its reputation grew even more. Viewers who may have been hesitant to experience its intensity in a cinema setting found themselves watching it at home, often in the quiet hours of the night where the film's slow-burn dread and oppressive atmosphere were magnified. Many reported that watching Longlegs outside the communal space of a theater made it even more disturbing, as the sense of isolation in personal viewing environments mirrored the loneliness and desolation present in the film's imagery. This at-home experience created another wave of discussion, with audiences sharing anecdotes of being unable to sleep, feeling compelled to pause the film at particularly uncomfortable moments, or noticing eerie background details they had missed in theaters. Streaming also broadened the audience, drawing in those who had seen the viral marketing and memes but were not habitual moviegoers. This wider accessibility allowed the film's influence to extend into demographics that traditional box office numbers could not fully capture. Horror films often thrive in streaming environments, as they lend themselves to repeat viewing, group experiences, and close analysis, and Longlegs proved especially suited to this. With its layered sound design and dense symbolic detail, it rewarded viewers who returned to it multiple times, picking up subtleties and foreshadowing that had gone unnoticed before. In online forums and social media threads, entire communities emerged to catalog these discoveries, creating collective databases of interpretations and symbolic mappings of the film's imagery. Academics took particular interest in the film's representation of evil. Some scholars argued that the character of Longlegs was deliberately designed to resist classification, operating as a liminal figure who inhabited the boundary between human and supernatural. This refusal to define him clearly reflected anxieties of the modern age, where danger often feels amorphous, hard to identify, and impossible to contain. Others highlighted the film's commentary on gender, noting that Maika Monroe's character functioned as a counterpoint to Longlegs' destructive masculinity. Her determination, empathy, and resilience contrasted with his performative power and chaotic domination, suggesting a thematic exploration of survival in the face of systemic violence. The conversation also extended to Perkins' lineage as a filmmaker. Being the son of Anthony Perkins, best known for his role as Norman Bates in Psycho, Osgood Perkins was frequently asked about how his father's legacy influenced his own work. While Perkins was careful not to frame Longlegs as a direct homage, many commentators observed that the film carried echoes of his father's contribution to horror history. The psychological depth, the focus on twisted identities, and the refusal to resolve tension neatly all seemed to resonate with themes that Alfred Hitchcock and Anthony Perkins had helped cement decades earlier. For Osgood Perkins, Longlegs marked not only a continuation of his own stylistic journey but a subtle dialogue with cinematic history, situating him as both heir to and innovator within the horror tradition. In addition to thematic depth, the film was analyzed for its technical innovations. Critics praised the way cinematographer Andrei Tilda copyright Tesaraki, working closely with Perkins, used framing to create unease, often positioning characters at the margins of the screen, leaving large empty spaces that invited dread. The choice to let darkness occupy vast portions of the frame was seen as both economical and artistic, turning negative space into a character of its own. Similarly, the editing style resisted the fast cuts typical of mainstream horror, instead embracing a slower rhythm that built tension through anticipation rather than release. This restraint amplified the impact of moments when violence did occur, as they felt sudden and shocking against the backdrop of prolonged stillness. The role of sound, once again, remained a recurring focus. Scholars pointed to the influence of music concrete diarist and avant-garde composition on the score, suggesting that the soundtrack functioned more like an art installation than traditional film music. This approach disrupted audience expectations, preventing them from settling into familiar auditory cues. In many horror films, certain musical motifs signal the approach of danger, but Longlegs frequently denied this comfort, introducing sounds that felt alien, unpredictable, and destabilizing. The result was a sonic environment that kept audiences perpetually uncertain, amplifying the film's psychological impact. Reception in international markets further demonstrated the film's reach. While rooted in an American setting, its themes of evil, trauma, and dread resonated across cultures. In Europe, critics praised it as a sophisticated example of contemporary horror, comparing it to works by directors such as Lars von Trier and Michael Hanke for its willingness to confront audiences with discomfort rather than offer escapism. In Asian markets, where horror traditions often emphasize spiritual ambiguity and psychological disturbance, the film was likewise appreciated, though some audiences found its pacing slower than local genre conventions. Regardless of region, however, the universal reaction was one of intrigue, debate, and engagement, underscoring the film's ability to transcend cultural barriers. Meanwhile, Nicolas Cage's performance continued to inspire widespread fascination. Interviews with Cage revealed his unique preparation process, which included extensive research into occult practices, serial killer psychology, and abnormal speech patterns. He spoke about wanting to create a character that could not be pinned down to any single archetype, a figure who could seem pathetic in one moment and terrifying in the next. Cage also emphasized his interest in the operatic nature of horror, suggesting that playing Longlegs allowed him to channel both the theatrical and the intimate dimensions of fear. For an actor often associated with larger-than-life roles, Longlegs provided an opportunity to merge his reputation for eccentricity with genuine psychological menace. Maika Monroe's performance, though less flamboyant, received equal praise for its discipline. Critics highlighted her ability to ground the film emotionally, providing a counterbalance to Cage's chaos. In interviews, Monroe discussed the challenge of maintaining subtlety in the face of such an overwhelming screen partner. She emphasized that her character's journey was about more than survival, it was about confronting the incomprehensible and choosing to persist despite the lack of answers. This nuance made her role resonate with audiences, many of whom found her portrayal of resilience deeply moving. The interplay between these two performances became one of the defining aspects of the film. Critics frequently describe the dynamic as a duel not of physical combat but of presence, with Monroe's quiet intensity clashing against Cage's explosive unpredictability. This tension mirrored the broader thematic conflict of the film, embodying the struggle between order and chaos, reason and madness, empathy and cruelty. The memes and internet culture surrounding Longlegs deserve their own place in its story. Within days of its release, screenshots of Cage in unsettling makeup began circulating online with captions that recontextualized his expressions into absurd everyday scenarios. His strange line deliveries became TikTok audio clips, remixed into comedic sketches and commentary. Rather than diluting the film's horror, these memes introduced it to new audiences, creating a phenomenon where humor and fear reinforced each other. Much like the way the Babadook became an unexpected queer icon or how Hereditary generated viral GIFs, Longlegs proved that horror films can extend their cultural influence through playful, communal reinterpretations. Even as the film settled into its cultural afterlife, discussions of its symbolism continued to flourish. Many focused on its use of religious and occult imagery, noting how it drew from a variety of traditions without aligning itself with any single mythology. This eclecticism reinforced the idea that evil in the film was not confined to one belief system but was instead a universal force, adaptable and omnipresent. Some viewers connected these elements to real-world anxieties about extremism, violence, and the breakdown of social order, suggesting that Longlegs reflected contemporary fears in allegorical form. Others saw the film as a meditation on storytelling itself. Longlegs, with his cryptic rituals and performances, could be interpreted as a figure who crafts narratives of terror, manipulating those around him by controlling the way events are framed. In this sense, he became a meta-commentary on horror as a genre, embodying both the lure and the danger of stories that captivate and disturb. Perkins' own penchant for ambiguous storytelling reinforced this reading, positioning the film as both a work of horror and a reflection on why horror fascinates us. The legacy of Longlegs within the horror genre continues to grow. It is frequently cited in discussions of modern classics, often mentioned alongside films like It Follows, Hereditary, and The Witch as part of a wave of films that redefined audience expectations. Its success also encouraged studios to continue supporting auteur-driven horror, opening the door for other directors to pursue bold, unconventional visions. For Osgood Perkins, the film solidified his reputation as one of the most distinctive voices in contemporary cinema, ensuring that his future projects would be met with heightened anticipation. As the aftershocks of Longlegs continued to ripple outward, the conversation began to take on an almost mythic quality. It was no longer just a film but a cultural moment, a nexus of conversations about horror's role in society, the artistry of filmmaking, and the strange way media mutates once it enters the digital sphere. The film became a kind of Rorschach test. Audiences projected their own fears and interpretations onto it, and the ambiguity of Osgood Perkins' design encouraged this multiplicity. What some saw as a supernatural tale, others insisted was strictly psychological, and still others argued that its refusal to choose was precisely the point. One of the most remarkable aspects of the film's reception was the degree to which audiences described a physical reaction to watching it. Unlike many horror films that rely on sudden shocks or gore to provoke fear, Longlegs cultivated a slow, grinding unease that manifested in bodily responses, tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, restlessness. Critics observed that the movie weaponized time itself, stretching moments so thin that audiences squirmed under the weight of anticipation. This quality reminded some of older traditions of horror, especially European slow burn cinema, while still feeling fresh in its contemporary execution. The effect was cumulative rather than a roller coaster of highs and lows. The film was a steady tightening of screws that left viewers strained by the end. The character of Longlegs himself became emblematic of a new archetype in horror. Whereas many horror villains are defined by clear motivations or recognizable traits, Longlegs seemed designed to resist understanding. Nicolas Cage's choice as a unpredictable line delivery, bizarre gestures, and moments of near-comic exaggeration were frequently compared to the surreal performances of German expressionist cinema or the stylized villainy of early Hollywood horror. Yet Cage brought a contemporary sensibility that prevented the performance from feeling antiquated. He tapped into a cultural moment where the most terrifying figures are often those who appear incoherent, irrational, and beyond negotiation. In this sense, Longlegs reflected modern fears about unpredictability, whether in individuals, in systems, or in the world at large. The film's production design and visual language deepened this sense of timelessness. Houses in Longlegs were never purely contemporary nor purely vintage. They seemed to exist in a liminal space, combining elements from multiple eras. Wallpaper patterns, furniture styles, and even appliances were chosen to avoid clear dating, creating a world that felt unmoored from time. This ambiguity heightened the atmosphere of dread, as viewers could not easily situate the events within a familiar temporal context. The decision to strip away clear markers of setting also reinforced the film's thematic universality. Evil, Perkins seemed to argue, is not bound to any single decade but is always lurking in the shadows of ordinary life. As fans dissected these details, they uncovered an entire secondary language within the film's imagery. Symbols scratched into walls, recurring motifs of circles and spirals, and unsettling patterns in everyday objects were catalogued and analyzed in depth. Online communities created visual guides, mapping these details across the film and speculating on their meaning. Some argued they referenced specific occult traditions, others insisted they were meant to reflect the cyclical nature of trauma and violence. Perkins' refusal to confirm or deny any of these theories ensured that they flourished unchecked, turning Longlegs into a living puzzle. This participatory quality transformed the film into more than a passive viewing experience. It became an interactive cultural artifact, a story that extended beyond the screen into forums, memes, and essays. The film's endurance in the cultural conversation was bolstered by its meme potential, which remained strong months after release. Nicolas Cage's distorted makeup, strange facial expressions, and odd intonations became staples of online humor. Clips of his character muttering cryptic phrases were re-edited into everything from video game commentary to political satire. TikTok creators used audio snippets of his voice as background for absurd skits, while Twitter, or X, as it had rebranded, circulated endless reaction images featuring his uncanny visage. Yet unlike some films whose mimification diminishes their perceived seriousness, Longlegs seemed to thrive on this dual life. The memes did not undermine its horror but amplified its presence, ensuring that even those who had not seen it were aware of its disturbing aura. Critics and academics drew attention to this phenomenon, noting how Longlegs exemplified the new media ecosystem of horror. Where older generations might have discussed a film through fanzines or academic journals, modern audiences dissected it in real time across digital platforms, blending earnest analysis with ironic humor. This dynamic allowed the film to reach wider audiences than traditional marketing alone could accomplish. It also reflected the dual role horror plays in culture as both a serious exploration of fear and a playful spectacle that can be reinterpreted endlessly. From a box office perspective, Longlegs defied industry expectations. Horror had long been recognized as a reliable genre for studios, with modest budgets often yielding strong returns. Yet few expected Longlegs, with its deliberate pacing and uncompromising ambiguity, to perform as strongly as it did. Its long legs at the box office became a point of irony and admiration, with industry analysts remarking on how the film's staying power was stronger than blockbuster competitors released around the same time. Even after its theatrical run had slowed, it continued to generate revenue through digital rentals, streaming deals, and international releases. In many markets, it outperformed studio horror films with far larger budgets, cementing its status as a case study in how originality and word of mouth can triumph over formula. The reception of Longlegs also had a ripple effect on the careers of its central figures. Nicolas Cage, already in the midst of a career renaissance thanks to projects like Mandy and Pig, found his role as Longlegs cited as one of his most memorable performances in decades. Critics praised his willingness to lean into grotesque eccentricity while still grounding the character in menace. Discussions about his career legacy increasingly positioned him as one of cinema's most fearless actors, capable of traversing mainstream blockbusters, avant-garde experiments, and indie dramas with equal commitment. Maika Monroe's profile rose as well, with many critics describing her as the definitive scream queen of her generation. Yet unlike earlier eras where the label was often reductive, Monroe's association with horror was celebrated as evidence of her versatility and strength as a performer. In Longlegs, she had demonstrated the ability to balance sympathy, resilience, and subtlety against one of the most overwhelming screen presences imaginable. This performance solidified her reputation as a central figure in modern horror and opened doors for even more ambitious projects. Osgood Perkins emerged as one of the most distinctive voices in contemporary filmmaking. While his earlier works had already attracted a devoted following, Longlegs propelled him into mainstream recognition. Critics noted his ability to combine the psychological unease of European art cinema with the visceral dread of American horror traditions. Perkins' lineage being the son of Anthony Perkins was frequently discussed, but many argued that Longlegs established him as a filmmaker in his own right, no longer overshadowed by his father's legacy. His careful control of atmosphere, his willingness to embrace ambiguity, and his confidence in trusting audiences to grapple with unresolved questions made him a unique presence in an industry often driven by clarity and convention. The symbolic analysis of the film grew richer over time. Some interpreters argue that Longlegs represented generational trauma, with his influence spreading across families and communities in ways that could not be eradicated by simple confrontation. Others saw him as a metaphor for systemic violence, a force that infiltrates ordinary lives without warning. Still others insisted that the film was a meditation on faith and doubt, with its occult imagery reflecting humanity's search for meaning in a world that often seems governed by chaos. Perkins' refusal to resolve these debates only added to the film's longevity, ensuring that Longlegs remained fertile ground for analysis long after other films had faded from memory. Cultural commentators also noted the film's role in solidifying the slow dread movement within horror. Following in the footsteps of films like The Witch and Hereditary, Longlegs demonstrated that audiences were willing to embrace horror that demanded patience and attention rather than offering constant shocks. Its success suggested that horror's future lay not only in franchises and reboots but in original, auteur-driven visions that challenged viewers to engage on deeper levels. For an industry often cautious about risk, the triumph of Longlegs provided a compelling argument for investing in bold new voices. Even years after its release, Longlegs continued to generate discussion. Retrospectives placed it among the most important horror films of its decade, while critics debated its place within the broader history of the genre. Film schools incorporated it into curricula on contemporary horror, using it as an example of how sound, cinematography, and performance can work together to create psychological unease. Meanwhile, fans continued to share memes, theories, and reinterpretations, ensuring that the film maintained its presence in popular culture. The endurance of Longlegs as both a cultural object and an evolving conversation highlighted the way horror functions not just as entertainment, but as a communal language of fear. Horror has always reflected the anxieties of its time, and with Longlegs that reflection was particularly sharp. Audiences found themselves returning to the film during moments of heightened global uncertainty, when the world outside already felt unstable, and using its imagery to articulate the dread that words could not capture. The long-limbed, grotesque figure of Cage's character became shorthand for the presence of something inexplicable and terrifying just outside the frame of daily life. Beyond its critical and audience reception, the film had a tangible effect on the industry. Studios began reassessing the potential for slower, mood-driven horror to achieve box office success. Executives who had once viewed such films as niche festival-bound started greenlighting projects with similarly unsettling premises. While not every attempt to replicate the Longlegs formula succeeded, the willingness to take chances on new directors, ambiguous scripts, and unconventional pacing expanded the possibilities of what could be funded. The film became a touchstone in pitch meetings, with writers and filmmakers using it as proof that audiences were ready to embrace horror that challenged them intellectually and emotionally. At the same time, Longlegs contributed to a broader cultural reevaluation of Nicolas Cage. For years, Cage had been the subject of ironic appreciation, with fans celebrating his unpredictable choices in both low-budget films and larger projects. With Longlegs, however, the irony gave way to awe. Here was an actor who had embraced the extremity of his craft and channeled it into something genuinely terrifying. Commentators began revisiting his entire career, drawing connections between his performance as Longlegs and earlier roles where he had experimented with heightened physicality and vocal stylization. Academic essays emerged that traced a line from Cage's work in Vampire's Kiss through Wild at Heart and Face Off to Longlegs, arguing that he had been building toward this kind of horror performance for decades. Maika Monroe, too, benefited from the film's resonance. Already celebrated for her work in It Follows, she became a central figure in discussions about modern horror heroines. Unlike the archetypal final girls of earlier decades, Monroe's character in Longlegs was not defined by purity, luck, or one-dimensional resilience. Instead, she was portrayed as flawed, vulnerable, and deeply human, qualities that made her endurance more compelling. Fans embraced her as a figure who represented survival not through invincibility, but through persistence and empathy. Her career trajectory after Longlegs included both genre films and dramas, but the association with horror remained central to her identity as an actress. She came to symbolize a generation of performers who embraced the genre not as a stepping stone, but as a space of artistic possibility. The film's influence extended into the visual arts and music scenes as well. Independent musicians sampled lines from the film in their tracks, often using distorted fragments of Cage's dialogue as unsettling background textures. Visual artists created pieces inspired by the film's recurring symbols, staging exhibitions that drew on its imagery of spirals, sigils, and liminal spaces. Even fashion designers began to experiment with motifs drawn from the film, producing collections that evoked its eerie blend of vintage Americana and occult unease. This cross-pollination reflected the way Longlegs had transcended the boundaries of cinema to become part of a wider cultural aesthetic. For scholars, the most fertile ground lay in the film's relationship to trauma. Many critics noted that Longlegs could be read as a meditation on the way violence reverberates across generations. The killer's reach extended not just to his victims but to their families, communities, and descendants, mirroring the way real-world traumas echo long after the original event. This interpretation gained traction in academic journals, where the film was cited alongside other works that address the intergenerational nature of suffering. The ambiguity of the killer's methods, whether supernatural or psychological, allowed for multiple readings, each reinforcing the idea that horror is most effective when it refuses to be pinned down to a single explanation. Sound design remained one of the most frequently discussed elements of the film. Viewers described the auditory experience of Longlegs as one of its most disturbing qualities. Whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, faint mechanical hums that suggested malfunctioning electronics, and sudden silences that erased all background noise combined to create a sense of sensory disorientation. For many audiences, it was this manipulation of sound, more than any single image, that haunted them long after the credits rolled. The soundtrack itself, sparse and often indistinguishable from ambient noise, was praised for its restraint. Rather than overwhelming viewers with music cues, it unsettled them by blurring the line between score and environment. The film's composer received acclaim for creating a soundscape that felt less like accompaniment and more like a living, breathing presence within the narrative. As the years passed, retrospectives began to cement Longlegs as one of the defining horror films of its era. Lists of best horror films of the 2020s consistently placed it near the top, alongside works like Hereditary, The Lighthouse, and The Witch. Film festivals hosted anniversary screenings, often accompanied by discussions with cast and crew. These events revealed new anecdotes about the production, as stories of how Cage improvised moments that made even the crew uneasy, or how Perkins would instruct the cast to hold pauses for several seconds longer than felt natural, creating a rhythm that disoriented both actors and viewers. Such stories deepened the mythos of the film, reinforcing its reputation as a work born from both careful planning and unpredictable creative sparks. The legacy of Longlegs also extended into how audiences remembered it collectively. For many, it became a kind of cinematic dare, recommended to friends with warnings about its disturbing impact. Conversations about it often began with "Have you seen it yet?" followed by descriptions of its most haunting scenes, shared like ghost stories. This oral transmission kept the film alive even for those who had not yet watched it, ensuring its place in the cultural imagination. Unlike some horror films that fade as their shock value diminishes, Longlegs remained effective because its power lay not in a single twist or reveal, but in an atmosphere that could not be easily replicated. In the broader scope of horror history, Longlegs occupied a unique position. It was simultaneously a continuation of traditions of the slow burn unease of art house horror, the grotesque villainy of classic monster cinema, and a bold step into new territory. By embracing ambiguity, leaning into dissonant performances, and cultivating a sense of dread that was as much psychological as supernatural, the film opened pathways for other directors to experiment with similar techniques. Its success challenged the industry to reconsider what horror audiences wanted, and its influence could be traced in a wave of subsequent films that prioritized mood, symbolism, and discomfort over spectacle. The symbolic density of Longlegs is one of the reasons it continued to attract essays, podcasts, and even book-length studies well after its release. Scholars often latched onto the motif of the long legs themselves, treating the killer's physicality as more than a quirk of design. In many analyses, the disproportionate limbs were interpreted as a metaphor for reach, both literal and figurative. The killer was not confined to one place, one time, or one victim. His influence stretched unnaturally far, disrupting the normal boundaries of safety. This idea connected to real-world fears about institutions, ideologies, or traumas whose influence extends across families, communities, and generations. The monster was not simply a man but a presence that intruded into spaces where he should not have had access. By emphasizing this exaggerated reach, Perkins crafted a figure who embodied the violation of boundaries that underlies much of human fear. Other critics drew attention to the film's religious undertones. While never explicitly theological, Longlegs incorporated imagery that resonated with traditions of Christian demonology and apocalyptic symbolism. Spirals and inverted crosses appeared fleetingly in the background, raising questions about whether the killer was channeling supernatural forces or whether these were simply his chosen tools of psychological terror. For audiences familiar with religious iconography, these details suggested that the evil in the film was not only personal but cosmic. Yet Perkins carefully avoided offering a definitive explanation, leaving the tension unresolved. This ambiguity allowed the film to be interpreted through both secular and spiritual lenses, expanding its appeal and deepening its mystery. Filming anecdotes that later emerged reinforced the eerie qualities audiences perceived on screen. Crew members recalled Cage arriving to set already in character, avoiding eye contact and speaking in a fragmented cadence that made even casual interactions unsettling. Monroe reportedly had to take long breaks between takes after particularly intense scenes, not because of any physical demand but because of the emotional exhaustion of confronting Cage's performance. Perkins encouraged this separation, believing that the genuine unease between the actors would translate into a more authentic on-screen dynamic. When interviewed years later, Cage described his approach as channeling something that frightened even me, a statement that only added to the aura of myth around the film. The visual style of Longlegs became another frequent subject of analysis. Shot with a muted color palette that leaned into browns, grays, and sickly greens, the film evoked the look of old crime scene photographs. This aesthetic choice contributed to a sense of decay, as if the entire world of the film was rotting from within. Critics praised the cinematography for making even ordinary space as a suburban kitchen, a rural gas station, an office cubicle feel alien and hostile. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, doorways framed characters like Cage's, and wide shots emphasized the isolation of figures against bleak landscapes. These choices gave the film a timeless quality, untethering it from any specific decade and making it feel at once contemporary and archaic. Box office discussions surrounding Longlegs were equally fascinating. While the film was made on a modest budget compared to major studio tentpoles, its profitability was immense. After an opening weekend that exceeded expectations, the film sustained momentum thanks to word of mouth. Unlike blockbusters that peak quickly, Longlegs grew week by week, fueled by audiences who urged their friends to see it before spoilers spread. Its financial success was analyzed as evidence that horror, when executed with originality, could outperform more expensive productions. Studio analysts compared its performance to earlier surprise hits like Get Out and Paranormal Activity, concluding that Longlegs had achieved the rare balance of critical acclaim, audience buzz, and financial return. The film's afterlife in digital spaces was equally significant. Online communities dissected every frame, posting screenshots of background details that seemed insignificant on first viewing but gained weight upon reconsideration. Fans debated whether a particular shadow represented the killer lurking unseen, or whether a recurring pattern of numbers hinted at a deeper conspiracy. This culture of analysis blurred the line between audience and critic, as casual viewers engaged with the film on a level of detail once reserved for academics. Perkins himself occasionally commented on these discussions, but always obliquely, refusing to confirm or deny fan theories. This strategy kept the speculation alive and ensured that the film remained an active conversation topic long after its theatrical run. In the years following its release, Longlegs influenced not only horror cinema but also television and streaming storytelling. Anthology series and miniseries began adopting similar pacing, drawing on the film's use of silence, suggestion, and dread rather than jump scares. Several creators openly cited Longlegs as an inspiration, noting that it had proven audiences would commit to unsettling narratives if rewarded with atmosphere and complexity. This ripple effect expanded the reach of the film, embedding its DNA into projects far beyond the original release. One of the more unexpected cultural side effects was the way Longlegs entered meme culture. Although its content was deeply disturbing, certain images, particularly Cage's distorted facial expressions and uncanny gestures, were extracted from their context and repurposed online. Clips of his character tilting his head at odd angles or muttering cryptic lines were shared on social media as shorthand for awkwardness, confusion, or menace. While this risked trivializing the film's horror, it also ensured its longevity in digital culture. Even people who had never seen the film encountered fragments of it online, which in turn encouraged them to seek out the full experience. As the film reached anniversary milestones, retrospectives framed it as a defining work of its decade. Critics argued that just as The Exorcist captured the spiritual anxieties of the 1970s and The Silence of the Lambs reflected the fascination with psychology and serial killers of the 1990s, Longlegs embodied the 2020s preoccupation with unseen threats, inherited trauma, and the porous boundaries between the human and the monstrous. Its blend of grounded procedural detail with surreal horror mirrored a world in which reality itself often felt unstable. In this sense, the film was not only a story but also a mirror, reflecting the ear's collective unease. Looking back, the legacy of Longlegs lies not only in its individual achievements but in the conversations it sparked. It encouraged audiences to embrace ambiguity, to tolerate discomfort, and to find meaning in what is not explained. It reminded the industry that horror thrives when it is treated with seriousness and care. And it cemented Nicolas Cage and Maika Monroe as figures whose performances transcended genre, reaching into the realm of cultural archetypes. Whether interpreted as a supernatural nightmare, a psychological study, or an allegory for generational fear, Longlegs endured because it refused to be one thing. It was many things at once, and in that multiplicity it became a work that demanded to be revisited, reinterpreted, and remembered. Another layer of discussion surrounding Longlegs that became increasingly prominent in the years after its release was how the film fit into the longer genealogy of American horror. Comparisons to Psycho were almost inevitable, since both films centered on enigmatic killers whose identities and motivations seemed to exceed the confines of ordinary crime. Hitchcock's Norman Bates had been terrifying precisely because he appeared so ordinary until his mask of normalcy slipped away. Perkins, however, inverted that formula. His killer was never ordinary, never approachable. From the very beginning, Longlegs portrayed its antagonist as a grotesque figure whose alien qualities resisted explanation. Critics pointed out that this choice marked a departure from decades of psychological horror that sought to rationalize killers through backstory and diagnosis. Whereas Norman Bates was dissected and explained in clinical terms, the figure in Longlegs defied such categorization, remaining resolutely irrational. This move aligned the film less with procedural crime thrillers and more with Gothic and supernatural traditions, even as it retained the trappings of an FBI investigation. Another frequent point of comparison was Rosemary's Baby. Both films explored the terror of invasion and not simply physical violence but a deeper, more existential form of intrusion. In Polanski's film, the intrusion was into the sanctity of pregnancy and the female body, dramatizing fears of autonomy being stripped away. In Longlegs, intrusion manifested in the form of letters, symbols, and whispered voices seeping into the lives of families who should have been safe within their homes. This connection underscored Perkins' interest in how horror often derives not from the spectacular but from the insidious. Evil in Longlegs was not a creature bursting through a door but an influence that wormed its way into the cracks of daily life until it corrupted everything. In this sense, the film participated in a long tradition of horror that turned the familiar into the uncanny, reminding audiences that danger could emerge from within their most trusted spaces. When compared to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another milestone of American horror, Longlegs stood out for its restraint. Hooper's film was chaotic, relentless, and saturated with noise, whereas Perkins opted for quiet, slow-burning dread. Yet the films shared an interest in body as to how they could be distorted, violated, and rendered unfamiliar. Cage's elongated movements and abnormal proportions echoed the grotesque physicality of Leatherface, though the effect was different. Where Leatherface embodied brute force and unrestrained violence, Longlegs embodied the slow, creeping horror of a figure that seemed to have been stretched beyond natural limits. Both tapped into bodily horror, but Perkins transmuted it into something surreal, dreamlike, and perversely elegant. Beyond individual comparisons, many scholars argued that Longlegs signaled a shift in the trajectory of 21st century horror. The early 2000s had been dominated by torture-based franchises like Saw and Hostel, while the 2010s saw the rise of elevated horror from filmmakers like Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and Jordan Peele. Longlegs, arriving in the 2020s, seemed to fuse the meticulous craft of elevated horror with the raw, primal unease of older exploitation traditions. It was intellectual yet visceral, artful yet deeply unsettling. This hybridity was one of its most distinctive qualities. It satisfied critics who demanded thematic richness while also delivering to audiences who wanted to be terrified in a way that bypassed rationality. One of the subtler aspects of the film that became central to later analysis was its engagement with gender. Maika Monroe's character was not simply a stock final girl surviving against the odds. Instead, she carried the weight of inherited trauma and institutional responsibility. Her role as an investigator placed her within structures of authority, yet her vulnerability and eventual unraveling demonstrated how fragile those structures were when confronted with the inexplicable. Unlike many horror heroines who triumph through resilience or cleverness, Monroe's character achieved no decisive victory. The ending remained ambiguous, suggesting that she, too, had been marked by the killer's influence. This complexity distinguished Longlegs from more formulaic horror narratives and invited feminist readings that saw the film as a meditation on the limits of agency within oppressive systems. The legacy of Longlegs also extended into how film schools and creative writing programs began using it as a case study. Students dissected its script structure, noting how it delayed major revelations until late in the narrative while still maintaining tension throughout. In workshops, instructors highlighted the film as proof that horror could sustain itself through atmosphere and suggestion without relying on constant action. Aspiring filmmakers studied its use of sound design, the way silence was weaponized, and how Cage's performance transformed physicality into narrative. Over time, Longlegs became part of the curriculum in courses not only on horror but also on performance studies, semiotics, and cultural criticism. The international reception of the film further demonstrated its breadth of impact. While American audiences were struck by its echoes of local crime lore and FBI procedural conventions, viewers in Europe and Asia often emphasized its surreal qualities, aligning it with art house traditions. Festivals in France and Japan screened the film alongside experimental works, framing it less as genre cinema and more as avant-garde. This dual identity of mainstream horror in some contexts, Art house cinema in others was part of what allowed Longlegs to endure globally. Its refusal to be pinned down to a single mode gave it a cross-cultural flexibility that many horror films lack. As anniversary retrospectives multiplied, one consistent theme was the way the film aged gracefully. Unlike horror that relies heavily on contemporary technology or trends, Longlegs remained timeless because of its avoidance of specific markers. The FBI offices seemed old-fashioned, the costumes were generic enough to evade a fixed decade, and the cinematography emphasized textures that could have belonged to any era. This timelessness made the film feel ever relevant, a nightmare preserved outside of history. For each new wave of audiences, the film appeared fresh, as though it could have been made yesterday or 50 years ago. The ultimate significance of Longlegs lies in the space it carved out between categories, between psychological realism and supranational horror, between mainstream thriller and experimental cinema, between meme fodder and serious cultural artifact. It refused simplification, and that refusal is precisely why it persisted. By the time critics began compiling lists of the most important horror films of the century, Longlegs was not merely included but often placed near the very top. It was described as a film that did not simply scare but haunted, a work that left a residue on culture rather than a temporary shock. In retrospect, what Perkins achieved was the rare feat of creating a horror film that felt like an event, not only in its release but in its ongoing afterlife. Longlegs was not just watched but studied, quoted, parodied, and dissected, its imagery seeping into other media and its influence stretching like the very limbs of its titular figure across the landscape of cinema. And perhaps that is the most fitting legacy of all, that a film about a presence that could not be contained or explained itself became a cultural presence impossible to confine.